Hello and welcome to AM Language. This is an IELTS video, but if you are of an intermediate level or an upper intermediate level, this lesson will also be useful. I'm just going to share this the lesson now with more people, so we can have more people joining. We've got 2 people already. Good afternoon. Please let me know who's watching if you are in the IELTS class, and please feel free to ask me any questions that you might have. In this lesson, what I want to look at with you, because you don't currently have your normal classes. I want to go over productive skills. Now, productive skills are speaking and listening. But what I thought we could do is have a look to see how you can still develop your productive skills, even though you are not in the classroom. Because it is challenging. Both speaking-wise and writing. Listening, there's various sites that you guys can use, and if you don't know which sites to use, please feel free to ask me. I would be more than happy to share some of the sites that would be useful when studying alone. Same with reading. You can also do there's also a lot of online reading material, such as with IELTS Up, for example. I'll just write that in the comment section here, IELTS Up. You might be familiar with it, you might not, but that's one site that is good to find material to help you with developing your listening and with your reading. One of the things that I would encourage you guys to do when trying to develop your listening and reading is to develop some sub-skills. Now, a sub-skill is, for instance, if we take something like reading, for example, a sub-skill would be, for instance, scan reading. If you don't know what scan reading is, scan reading would be if you were looking at the questions and you read a question, and you highlighted the most important words in the question, and then you go looking through a particular paragraph of the reading, looking for the words in the paragraph that are connected to what the question is asking you. So there, you're not reading for the understanding, you're just running your eyes across the page so you can find the important words that you need to find. If it were listening, for example, a good sub-skill to develop with listening is predicting, being able to predict the answers. This also comes in a little bit with like when you look through your questions that you need to answer in the listening. And even though in 2020 the listening in the exam no longer gives you an example, you still have time before the recording starts to look at the paper. And when you look at the paper, this is where the predicting side of things comes in. This is when you can look at the type of questions and automatically sort of think to yourself, what type of language should I be listening for? And that's a really important skill. It saves you a lot of time and it helps you to develop your ability to focus for detail, listening for focus, for example, listening for detail, sorry. So it channels your listening. But like I said, what we're going to look at in today's in today's lesson is trying to develop productive skills, but techniques that you guys can look to do in your free time. Well, not your free time, but as you're not currently having lessons due to the coronavirus. I'm going to try and help you guys develop your speaking and develop your writing skills on your own, and what options there are so you can get feedback. So let's start off with the speaking side of things. I'm going to share a good website actually for with you while we're doing this. I want to see if I can share a good website which has a lot of questions that you can get used to answering. Let's see, IELTS exam questions. Oh, not the right one. IELTS questions. Actually, that's a point. I did say IELTS Up before, and I do recommend IELTS Up. It's a good, it is a good site when it comes to trying to develop. So what I'll do is I'm just going to give you some examples. So let's start off with question 1. Now, with the speaking, what you guys can do to help develop your ability during this period is record yourself. So I would say practice trying to answer questions, and then listen to yourself and listen to the type of answers you are giving, and see how many answers you yourself can understand. I'll just put this over here, www.IELTSup.com should be it. There's a little hyphen in there actually. Okay, that's the site. So yes, first things first, record yourself and go over the same answers. See how your answer changes, and then listen back to your answers. Use this period to try and learn how you can identify common mistakes, especially mistakes that you yourself you are making. One of the things that you guys can also look out for is the grammar structures of your speaking. So does the structure sound like English, or does it sound like your first language? Does it sound German? Does it sound Russian? Does it sound Spanish, Korean, Japanese, whatever your first language is? So this is really important. A good way of being able to know if it's not English is if you go back to the very basics. Does it follow the pattern of subject, verb, object? Or can you see a slight problem? Can you see a slight difference from that? So let's look at some answers, some questions. And in this, we can help you. I can try and help you with some kind of phrases that you guys can use, especially when you want to give yourself some time to think, especially if there's a question that you might not have thought of before. Maybe it's a question that you might never have even considered important or even worth thinking about. But they do that in the IELTS because if they want to test to see if you can answer basic questions as well as more complex questions as well. Like I said, guys, if you have any questions during this lesson, please just ask in the live chat. So let's go with some examples. We'll do I tell you what, let's go with books and films to start off with. Um, Now, first question, do you like watching movies? Now, most people to this might say yes, but there are some people who don't. So I'm going to give you an example for both yes and no. Uh, First of all, if someone does ask you a question, do you like watching movies? Please don't just say yes. Um, and I would say don't even necessarily start off with yes. Um, you can still say yes without saying yes. For instance, if it's, let's say it's a big yes, you can go with naturally. Of course, I like watching movies. So yes, that's number one there. You can go naturally. Of course, I like watching movies. And then you can go on, and this is an opportunity to add in something specific. But instead of saying necessarily specifically, play around with the language. You can use you can go for words like in particularly, for example, in particularly. So if this were me, for example, and I were answering this question, so do you like watching movies? Naturally, of course, I like watching movies. In particularly, um, I really enjoy watching movies from the late 1980s. I think they're really good fun, and continue from there. Important, and I know this is something that your teacher Alison will have told you already many times. Please don't repeat. There's obviously some words that you can't help but repeat, but these words are probably going to be more functional words. Now functional words are words that are there just because they need to be there because of grammar. These are articles, for example, or certain prepositions. Um, they are there because they don't have a meaning. They're there because the grammar needs them to be there. But words with meaning, um, you don't need to use the same word, and try and not repeat, even with adverbs. Now, I would always say, like, if it's very easy to get stuck into the habit of using words like very, really, but try and avoid using them again and again and again. See if you can build up your what we would call a vocabulary bank, really. If you ever are wondering, okay, what words can I use? I'm thinking of really, for example. Um, I'm thinking of very. What other words can I use? There's a little trick. I spoke about it yesterday in the upper intermediate class, but it's when you take an adjective and you turn it into a verb. Sorry, you take an adjective and you turn it into an adverb that you use before. And when you do that, you just turn it into an adverb by adding an ly. So, for example, let's say you're talking about a film. So naturally, of course, I like watching movies, in particular movies from the late 80s, because they are um, awfully and awfully enjoyable, for example. So I've taken the adjective awful, I've turned it into an adverb, and it's a negative adverb, but more importantly, my adjective is positive. So if my adjective is positive, then it's positive. It doesn't matter if I use a negative adverb. The negative adverb is not the meaning. It's always the adjective. So by saying because they are awfully enjoyable, this is a positive. What you can also see is I haven't used the term good. I've avoided the term good. Now, it doesn't mean you should never use good, but again, the danger is if you start off answering these questions and you go in with simple language, you're going to trick your brain. Your brain is going to naturally go for what is easy, not what is more difficult. What you need to remember is the structure. If you remember the structure, then you can play around with more complicated language, because the grammatical structure isn't necessarily going to change. We just need to be thinking about the context and the meaning. But the language structure, that's not going to change too much, really. So play around with your adverbs and play around with your adjectives. Not only that, also play around with your verbs as well. Now, I just used a good phrase. Not only that, but. Now, this phrase here is really good. This is when you want to emphasize something else. So, for instance, you are giving point A, and you want to talk about you're talking about point A, and there's point B, but you want to emphasize the importance of point B. So we can link the two ideas together by saying not only that, but. So, for example, naturally, of course, I like watching movies. In particular, I enjoy watching. Particularly, I like watching movies from the late 80s because they are awfully enjoyable. But not only that, they are also entertaining because of the plot. Now, I added something else in there, and that's where you put the but. You can put the but either side. Now, if it's in the middle of your sentence, but not only that, they are. So you can play around with where you put the but I should say that if you are going to use this phrase, it's better to put the but before the not only. So automatically, your response is more expansive. Now, let's say you are not a big movie fan. Let's say you don't watch a lot of movies, or you don't watch a lot of TV series, okay? Now, let's just remind ourselves of the question, do you like watching movies? Okay, let's say, for example, the answer is no. Now, for a moment, I would like you to imagine of the type of question you might get where the answer is a no. You don't enjoy doing the activity. So, okay, in this case, it's watching movies. But let's say you do like watching movies. But the question is, do you like watching sport? Maybe you don't like watching sport. Maybe it's, do you like art? Maybe you don't. Do you like modern day music? Maybe you don't. So try and think of an activity that you yourself are not really interested in. Again, try and avoid just simply saying no or going straight in with a no. Consider your other options. So, for instance, do you like watching movies? And your answer is no. Instead of saying no, you can say, what would be a good one? Okay, a simple alternative would be not really. However, let's go with something that you guys might have heard of before. You could say, well, watching movies. In fact, to be honest, let's go with that. Start off with, give you some thinking time. So, to be honest, watching movies is not really my thing, or not my is not my cup of tea. That's one example. So you can come out with a phrase. You can come out with the simple thing saying it's not really my thing. That, by the way, is really informal English. Do not think it's formal. To say something's not really your thing is not formal. But you've got the opportunity to use a phrase like, oh, it's not my cup of tea. And going in with a phrase like, well, to be honest, it's watching movies is not my cup of tea. Automatically, it's a more enriched way to say no. And it gives you more time to think of your other answers as well. So that would be my suggestion. Now, let's say, um, let's say you've got another question. Let's say this time it's on books, for example. This can be a little bit difficult. It depends how much you read. So if someone were to ask you, what's the last book you read? Okay, I think that's one of the questions. Yes, what is the last book you read, and did you like it? To be honest with you, I question about the grammar of that question. What was the last book you read would be more accurate than what is the last book you read. So that's a little mistake there on that side. But let's say the question is, what was the last book you read? Now, again, I'm going to give you two examples. One, if you can remember the last book you read, and one, if you cannot remember the last book you read. Like the video if you can remember the last book you read. So let's say you can remember. You can start off by going with, again, a useful phrase. So, what was the last book you read? You can start off by saying, I have to say. Okay? I have to say, the last book I read was brilliant, was interesting, was fascinating, was engaging. Go with the adjective there. It was called whatever the book is called. Now, in my case, the last book I read and finished, because I'm reading a number of books at the same time at the moment. So the last book I read was The Problem of Pain by C.S. Lewis. So if this were me answering the question, what was the last book you read and what did you think? I would say, I have to say, the last book I read was brilliant. It's by C.S. Lewis and it's called The Problem of Pain. The book explores the suffering aspect of life. You go off and you try to explain what the book is about. Now that is one phrase that you can use, I have to say. Now let's say you can remember, but not clearly. Okay. You can say, you can go with, if I recall, the last book I read was blah, 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 whatever it might be. So if you're struggling to remember the book, or if you're struggling to remember what your answer is, give yourself time to think with a conditional. If I recall, the last book I read was blah, blah, blah. Okay, so in my case, what was the last book you read? If I recall, it was The Problem of Pain by C.S. Lewis. So give yourself thinking time. Now, if you can't remember the last book you read, now, again, it doesn't have to be a book. It could be a film. It could be a holiday. Who knows? Give yourself some thinking time. Again, if someone asks you a question and the answer is, well, I can't remember, for example, you can go with, again, you could go with, to be honest. That's always a good start. But let's say you want to mix it up. Change it to honestly. Honestly, the name of the book escapes me. Now, what does this mean? Honestly, the name of the book escapes me. This is a nice way of saying, well, an interesting way of saying, honestly, I can't remember. But it's showing an interesting phrase here. Honestly, the name of the book escapes me, so I can't remember. But now add in a but here. The type of books I do like to read are autobiographies, for example, or fiction, or historical, or drama, whatever it might be. So you still need to answer the question in terms of what your interests might be, but don't worry if the answer is, well, I can't remember. Just try and use phrases like this, like I've written in the live chat, that can help you. The one way of looking at the speaking, and this is a good tip here, consider the speaking, all aspects of the speaking, especially part 1 and part 3. Treat it as an opportunity to explore your answer. If you take the approach of, well, I'm going to explore my answer, it gives you time to actually, it changes your mindset. So I'm now going to talk about exam technique. If someone asks you a question, like, what movies do you like to watch? And you are just thinking of, right, I want to show him my range of vocabulary. I want to show him my range of grammar. You could easily fall into the trap of not answering the question. Now, this happens. This is a really common mistake that students make. They get really focused in terms of, right, I really want to show my range of vocabulary and grammar, and they forget to answer the question. So my advice would be, take the opportunity to explore the answer of the question. And if you explore the answer of the question, just like you would do in a normal conversation, you will come across more naturally. And that is how you also get marks for fluency, because they're not just looking, the examiner and the interlocutor, because the person who is speaking to you, who asks you the question in this exam, is called an interlocutor, a very strange name. We'll just call him the examiner because it's a bit easier. But what they are looking for is not just your accuracy or your range of vocabulary. They're also looking for fluency. And this is why you've got to make sure that you still, if you try to go with the attitude of, I'm going to explore the answer, it will help you with your fluency. And it will also help you to make sure that you answered the question. The greatest amount of marks you can probably get is automatically answering the question. Doing better with your choice of vocabulary and your range of grammar, those are bonus points. And that really comes into play when you're trying to get 6.5, 7, and 8, or 9. There you really need the whole thing. But to start off with, make sure you do the basic right and answer the question. Now, let's have a little look at part 2. Right. I know that you guys have probably looked at this. I'm just over here. I want to talk about an exam technique for part 2. And the exam technique I want you guys to think about is your note taking. You've got 1 minute to write down notes. Most of the time, whenever I myself have given students mock speaking exams, part 2, the note taking is not particularly great. They don't help them. It's very common that students don't help themselves. Remember, you will see the question, and it tells you what you need to tick. So if the question is, describe a book or film that had a strong impact on you, you should say, what was it, when you read or saw it, how it influenced you, and say if you liked it and why. So first things first, make sure you know your answers for each of those points. If you can make sure you answer each of those points, you will answer the question. And it goes back to making sure your first priority, answer the question. Once you know your answers for those questions, you can simply do it with just a word, just a really short bit of language. For instance, if it were me, what was it? Okay, describe a book or film that had a strong impact on you. You should say, right. So let's say the last book I read was The Problem of Pain by C.S. Lewis. Okay, so what was it? The Problem of Pain. Number two, when you read or saw it. I read it. Actually, wait a minute. I got it wrong. It wasn't the last book I read. Sorry, the last book I read was The Road Less Traveled and Beyond. Whoa. Okay, I'm going to use that. So, what was it? The Road Less Traveled and Beyond by M. Scott Peck. Really good book. I strongly recommend it. The Road Less Traveled. I'm going to write that in here anyway. The Road Less Traveled and Beyond. That's extra and beyond. There's 3 books of it. It's by a guy who was a psychiatrist for most of his life, but the book is just about his observations of life and human behavior. And the original book, titled The Road Less Traveled, came out in the 70s. And just think of all the questions you have in your head about life and life decisions and thinking, anxiety, worries, the uncertainty of life. The author explores. And again, that's the word I want to say here, explores. He talks about it. And it helps you kind of discover things as you go along. Anyway, I have digressed. So going back to it. So what was it? The Road Less Traveled and Beyond. That is what I would write. When you read or saw it. Over Christmas, 2019. Good. How it influenced you? Well, this book, how did it influence me? I could write, for instance, just simple language, life perspective. And that's it. That's a big category. Or perspective on life, or the way I look at life, the way I look at my life. So choose something short. Don't write sentences, and say if you liked it and why. Okay, here obviously first I can just, in terms of note taking, I can write yes, why. And I could just write a simple thing such as, for this, I would say, thought-provoking. If something is thought-provoking, it makes you think, but it makes you think deeply. So not simple thinking, deep thinking. Okay, so I already know what my answers are going to be. The next thing that I'm going to think about, that notes that I might write, if I still have time, this is when you write down certain language that you might want to use, or maybe you want to think of a specific grammar point to help explain when you read it. So let's say in my case, I read it over Christmas, for example, and I want to make sure I get my sentence right because it's in the past. If I have time, this is when and only when I can really think about accuracy. So in this case, this is when I might make a note for answering this point. I could say, right, it was Christmas 2019. Where was I? I was in Argentina and generally traveling through South America. So now I might be thinking, right, okay, I know my structure. I need to use a past. But, what prepositions? This is your opportunity to give yourself some time to think, as long as you have time. So in this case, I might sort of write to myself, right, important things I need to put in here. I was in Argentina. It was, is it in Christmas or over Christmas? Over Christmas, right. I write over Christmas, so I remember the right preposition. Am I going to try and write a past perfect, or am I just going to keep it simple? Ooh, you know what? Keep it simple. Reason being, Unless if you are confident and you know what you're doing, better to go for simple grammar than complicated grammar and you totally get it wrong. And that's I can't stress this enough. If you are confident using the language that is more complex, let's say a past perfect, or you might want to go for a real mix of past perfect and past simple or past continuous, and you've practiced it, then go for it. But if you have any doubt, and I mean any doubt, even like a 5% of doubt, don't go for the complicated grammar. Stick to something simple. Remember, what is more important is your ability to communicate yourself. And this is another thing. The examiner is, yes, accuracy is important. Yes, you get bonus points if you come out with really complex or advanced grammar. Yes. But what is more important in order to make sure you still get good marks? How clearly you are understood. How clearly do you communicate what you want to communicate? And that is so important. And you get far more marks if you communicate yourself clearly than if you're trying to use complicated grammar and you don't communicate yourself clearly. It's going to hurt you. So sometimes less is more. Sometimes simple is more. So really think about it. Now, if there are certain grammar points that you do want to try and use and you think, okay, maybe there's like, for instance, conditionals or passive voice. I mean, a lot of the stuff that can get you some really good marks is what you would learn at intermediate. I mean, intermediate outcomes, for instance, that we use covers a wide range of really difficult language. Practice using it again and again and again. Feel free to send us examples of your note taking, and we can tell you if yes, this looks good or this not so much. But when you do it, make sure you are timing yourself. So that brings me to the end of part 2. Now, I did say I was going to give some time to writing. So I'm not going to look at part 3. What I'll do is, because we've got another lesson, I think it's on Friday afternoon. I'm combining IELTS with upper intermediate classes. What I'll do is I will go into a little bit, I'll dedicate more time to part 3 and how you can explore part 3. So for the writing, what I would like to say about the writing side of things is when you are looking at, we'll start off with part 1. Now, part 1, again, common trap with part 1. People trying, again, complicated grammar when it's not needed. Remember, part 1, you need to write, obviously, about what you can see, not what you think you can see, not what you think the graph or the diagram means, only what you can see. Therefore, your choice of language has to be careful, and most of the time, it does need to be ridiculously complicated. If it's a graph or 2 graphs or 2 pie charts, what you need to do, make sure you get the basics right. You're going to be talking about comparatives. Where can you get really good points? Your linkers. This is the type of what we call discourse markers to link ideas together. So you can have present simple, present simple. You can have variations of the present tense. It doesn't need to be overly complicated. What needs to be really done well, though, is how you link one idea to another, especially when you're using comparisons. This is when you need to start using words like while, for example, or linking phrases like in relation to, for example. Now, I'm going to give you an example of how to use both of these, okay? In case you're not completely confident in using them. Oh, another one, whereas. Now, this is a really annoying one. I don't know if any of you have come across whereas. I'm sure some of you have. I'll give you some examples of how to use them. So let's take while. Let's say we're talking about two pie charts, for example. So we can say in pie chart A, we can see that unemployment rose by 5% in 1995, while in chart B, unemployment rose by 8% in the same year. Okay, so here is an example. I'm going to post this now. I'll just share it. So I'll just read it again before I post it, just to make sure I haven't made a mistake. In pie chart A, we can see that unemployment rose by 5% in 95, while in pie chart, while in pie chart B, unemployment rose by 8% in the same year. I should add here, you do have the option. You could even replace unemployment with it, because we already know what we're talking about. But this is an example of how you can use while. The sentence itself is not really complicated. I've just used two present simple sentences, but I've used while. And it's a good way of trying to compare things. Now, in relation to, how can we use that? Well, let's say we are talking about what's the other type of things that you're more likely, that you often get. Let's say this time you're looking at a bar chart, for example. So instead of a pie chart, a bar chart. So you could start off with in relation to the sales of books. The graph shows a rise of 6% in 2017, for example. In relation to, this is a good one just to introduce the specific aspect of your graph that you're going to talk about. And that's how we use it. It's to introduce a specific aspect that you might find within a graph. Now, whereas, this is a strange one. Let me think of a good example. Okay. Whereas pollution increased. Whereas levels of pollution increased over a 5-year period. So whereas levels of pollution increased over a 5-year period in North Italy, pollution decreased in southern Italy. Now, whereas can be used both at the start or in the middle of the sentence, but Again, it kind of has a, I suppose you can use it in a similar way to while. It takes on a similar linking way. What you're wanting to do is you want to compare two things together um, about the same topic, but there's a difference. To put it simply, um, my sister. Um, sorry, I need a drink. Oh. My sister Andy. So yes, my sister Andy uh, likes to ride bicycles, whereas my sister Antonia likes to swim. So here we're talking about exercise, but I'm comparing two different forms of exercise that my sisters both that my sisters do. So there has to be a difference, but there has to be a common theme in it as well. If there are other linkers you would like me to talk about, please ask in the live chat below. So that's the other thing. So just to recap, one, when you're talking about the part one of the written tasks, where you might have a bar chart, a pie chart, a diagram, whatever, a map, whatever it might be, make sure, first of all, you think about about answering the question. Do not overcomplicate your language. You can stick to using simple, present simple, for example. Where you're going to get marks for is, first of all, answering the question properly, and two, using your linking language correctly. The linking language is what's going to help the person reading to follow. So if you use the linking language properly, the person will be able to follow. So automatically, you're getting points for answering the question and being able to communicate clearly. And that's the point of it, really. How well do you explain yourself? And this is no different when we end up talking about the essay. Now, briefly on the essay. Typically speaking, people are expected to divide their essay into maybe 4 to 5 paragraphs. It depends on the type of question and how much exploring the question requires. Typically speaking, the IELTS question will be fairly generic, so you have to be able to discuss, and you have to be able to show that you can discuss ideas for or against arguments, positives, negatives. Again, you don't necessarily need to worry too much about always trying to throw in complicated grammar. The odd bit of complicated grammar that is relevant is good. Complicated grammar that is not relevant to the question is obviously not good. Typically speaking, passive voice, definitely. And then in essay questions, passive voice, I would definitely explore the passive voice, practice writing the passive voice, practice using certain certain phrases to help you use the passive. For instance, instead of saying "in my opinion," go in with phrases like "it can be argued," "it can be said." It helps you automatically. It sets your sentence up in a correct way, whereby you're not having to talk about I all the time. You're presenting arguments, especially if they're arguments that you might not even agree with as well. And it can help you get into the right frame of mind. But again, the really important thing is make sure that you are communicating yourself clearly. Clear communication and getting the basics right help you far more than trying to use really complicated grammar. Granted, sometimes you are going to need to try and use some complicated grammar if you're really trying to get something like a 7 or an 8. But you need to make sure that if you are doing that, it's relevant to answering the question. And like I said, in the discussion section, using the passive voice, using conditionals, these are the type of more complex sort of grammar forms that you should have the opportunity to use. Trying to come out with a future present perfect, for example, you're not definitely going to come across a question that will require you to use that, though it's useful to know what it is and how to make it. But nonetheless, it's not the most likely sort of grammar form that you're going to need to use. I just need some more water. So, like I said, if you are watching and you have any questions in the live chat, please feel free to ask. I am more than happy to ask any questions you might have. Actually, that reminds me, how can you do this on your own? How do you know if what you're writing is good? Okay. First things first. Find a question this week, be it task 1 and task 2. And every day, answer the same question again and again and again. Explore the difference in your answer. Read through your answer. Think about what you're trying to do. Do you understand it? Do you yourself follow your trail of thought? What mistakes can you see that you know that you tend to make? And see if you can get other people to read it as well. Even if there are other students, do they understand what you're trying to say? Feel free to post it online, send it to us on Facebook, or in the comment section below. Share with us. Just because we can't go to school because of the coronavirus does not mean learning has to stop. Now, in terms of the tasks, what I would say is, again, IELTS Up is a very good site that presents a lot of material. Let me see if I can find another site. There tend to be a few ones. I have one in mind. What's the name? IELTS. Where is it? Where is it? Where is it? There we go. Yeah, this is it. Okay. Another good site is IELTS-exam.net. I'm going to write it in the live comment section here. And I'll add it in the actual description later. This is really good. This is a good site. It gives you lots of ideas of the sort of questions that are being asked, both whether it's speaking, writing, listening, reading. And what is really good about the site, which I like, is that it tends to be relatively, at times it can be quite up to date as well, including it gives you ideas or examples of actual questions that have been used recently in the IELTS exam as well. So I do recommend it. It's a good site. It gives you lots of ideas, and it certainly can be of some good use to you. Need some more water. Okay. Regarding future videos, if there are specific videos you would like me to make, by the way, guys, on the subject of IELTS, please do say so. I'll be more than happy to dedicate some specific videos to IELTS. What I'm really pleased about with the IELTS course that we have made at AM is the level of success students have had since we launched the new course. We went through a whole process of really evaluating to see how we can make a better make a course as good as it can be. And it's still in the, and the aspects of it are still developing as well. And I hope it continues to develop in the future, because it started off very well last year. The average score was 7 in the end. It was like 6.5 and 7, and we got even some 8s as well. I think the lowest score from an AM language student was 6 in the end. So that was really good. And considering the number of students we had last year, that's a good turnout. Regarding your books, guys, you guys have New Insight to IELTS, the Cambridge edition. Like I said, that's not currently being used as our main book in the class for your general one. It's the one that might be used more often in your intensive. But even if you have it for the general, the teacher might dip into it from time to time. But the thing about that book is this is where, in this period, at the moment, when you're at home, this is when that book is really good, because it really goes into talking about strategies, exam techniques. So really go through that book, read it, look at it, follow the guidance in that book. It will help you with the structures of IELTS. What I like about Ready for IELTS is the online interaction that it can give you during the class, but it gives you more vocabulary and more grammar as well. And I think the reading material, there's a great amount of reading material in there as well. So both books have its pluses. Ideally, in the future, both books become available to students. And that will eventually happen, but of course that's not an option. That's not possible at the moment due to the coronavirus. But hopefully, when things kick off again, both books can become. It won't be too long before we have both books available for students. So thank you very much, guys. I really appreciate you coming on to watch. I hope this lesson has been of some help to you. And like I said, if you have any questions, please let me know. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, like the video, turn on the notification bell as well. And feel free to share this video with other students as well, that you or friends of yours who are thinking of taking the IELTS exam as well. So thank you very much, guys. Have a really good day. And I will see you next time. Which, let me just remind myself, I think it's Friday afternoon, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, it'll be Friday afternoon. The Friday afternoon session is going to be for upper intermediates, IELTS students, and advanced students. Okay, great. Thank you very much, guys. Have a great day. Bye for now.